Viking death rituals were as terrifying as they were intricate, steeped in a deep belief that death was not the end, but a powerful transition into another realm. The Vikings didn't simply honor their dead. They believed that without the right rituals, a soul could never find peace. Their death rituals were meant to ensure that the deceased reached their proper place in the afterlife, whether it was the feasting halls of Valhalla or the shadowy realm of Hell. The Vikings had a complex understanding of death and the afterlife. Valhalla, the Hall of Odin, was the destination for those who died in battle, warriors who were worthy of eternal glory. Here, the slain would feast and fight, preparing for Ragnarok, the end of the world. Valhalla was a place of endless battle and celebration, and to be chosen for this afterlife was the ultimate honor for a Viking warrior. To the Norse, a warrior's death in battle was the only way to reach this glorified hall. However, those who did not die in battle, those who succumbed to illness, old age, or dishonor, did not earn a place in Valhalla. Instead, they were believed to travel to Hel, the realm of the dead, ruled by the goddess Hel, daughter of Loki. Hel was a cold, dark, and barren place, where the souls of those who died unworthy of Valhalla would reside. It was not a place of glory or feasting, but a place of eternal separation from the gods. Because of these beliefs, Viking death rituals were meant to honor the deceased and ensure that they reached their proper destination. For those who died in battle, the rituals often began with a funeral pyre. The deceased's body was placed on a boat, which was then set aflame, sending the spirit of the deceased on a fiery journey to the afterlife. The boat symbolized the passage from this world to the next, and the fire was believed to help carry the soul to the realm it belonged to, either Valhalla or Hell. In some cases, human sacrifice was a part of the Viking death ritual. Slaves, servants, or even animals were often sacrificed to accompany the deceased on their journey, ensuring that the warrior would have everything he needed in the afterlife. These sacrifices were meant to help the deceased maintain power and honor in their next life. The Vikings saw death as a continuation of their warrior spirit, and they believed that bringing companions to the afterlife ensured the warrior was not alone. But Viking burial practices were not limited to the burning of bodies. The wealthy and powerful were often given elaborate ship burials. The body was placed in a longship surrounded by grave goods such as weapons, food, and treasures. In some cases, even animals or servants were buried alongside the dead. The ship would then be sent out to sea, allowing the deceased to sail into the afterlife. This type of burial was reserved for the elite, the great warriors who had earned a place among the gods. One of the most famous Viking ship burials was found in Oseberg, Norway, where two women were buried in a longship along with a wealth of treasures. The ritual was meant to honor the deceased and ensure that they would have a proper journey to the afterlife. But even the less fortunate were given rituals to ensure they were honored. These rituals were not just a way to mourn the dead, but a way to ensure that the soul was properly taken care of and sent off to its proper place. For the Vikings, death was not something to be feared. It was simply a part of the natural order, a transition that needed to be respected and treated with honor. Without proper death rituals, the soul would be lost, wandering in the darkness. The fear of this fate drove the Vikings to carry out their rituals with exacting care, ensuring that each soul found its way to the afterlife. Their belief in the afterlife was as powerful as their belief in life itself, and it was this belief that made their death rituals so terrifying. Viking death rituals were not just about the proper burial of the deceased. They were a way to ensure that the soul was properly guided to the afterlife. For the Vikings, death was both a solemn and terrifying process full of rituals, meant to honor the fallen and prepare them for their journey. The way the dead were treated after death reflected the Viking belief that the afterlife was just as dangerous as life itself. While the most common Viking death rituals involved funeral pyres, the process could be far more brutal. For a Viking who died in battle, honor was paramount, and his passage to the afterlife had to be marked with grand gestures. After death, many warriors were buried with weapons, shields, and other tools they would need for battle in the afterlife. However, some funerals included human sacrifice, an unsettling tradition that ensured the deceased was accompanied by companions in the afterlife. One of the most terrifying aspects of Viking death rituals was the practice of sacrificial burials. In these rituals, servants, slaves, or even animals were sometimes killed and buried alongside the dead, with the belief that these sacrifices would serve the deceased in the afterlife. In some extreme cases, even prisoners of war were sacrificed to join the deceased on their journey. These practices were intended to honor the dead and ensure that they would have everything they needed in the afterlife. But they also reflected the Viking belief that the soul was powerful enough to continue its existence even after death. But sacrifices didn't end with the dead alone. Viking funerals were public affairs where mourners would gather around the deceased, offering final respects. Feasting, singing, and sometimes drinking were involved, but the mood was far from joyous. In some instances, the funerals were marked by a mock battle where living warriors would fight in memory of their fallen comrade. These battles, sometimes staged by close friends or family, were violent and intense, reflecting the aggressive nature of Viking culture. The battles were seen as an homage to the warrior's spirit, reenacting the kind of life they had led in battle. But for those watching, they were a terrifying reminder of the violence and brutality of Viking life. The ship burial, one of the most dramatic and terrifying of Viking rituals, was reserved for the most respected warriors. The body of the deceased would be placed in a longship, often surrounded by offerings like weapons, food, shields, and treasures. In some cases, animals or even slaves were placed aboard the ship to accompany the deceased into the afterlife. The boat would then be set afire and sent out to sea, symbolizing the deceased's journey to the afterlife. This ritual wasn't only symbolic. It was seen as the only way to properly honor the fallen warrior and prepare them for the afterlife. It was a final fiery departure that signified the warrior's eternal journey, heading into the unknown realms. Sacrifices were not limited to the dead alone. The Vikings believed that the dead could influence the living if their spirit was not properly sent off. There were specific fears associated with improper burials, as it was believed that souls not given the right send-off would become restless spirits, haunting the living and bringing misfortune. This belief led to the sometimes grisly sacrifices at Viking funerals, where living humans were sent to accompany the dead, ensuring the deceased would travel with honor and power. The brutality of Viking death rituals extended to the manner in which these ceremonies were performed. Viking society was deeply concerned with maintaining power and honor, and death was not just a physical event, it was a way of ensuring that power remained intact after one is passing. The spirit of the deceased was seen as a force that needed to be honored and channeled into the afterlife through rituals that were often bloody and unsettling. These rites were performed to ensure that the warrior's strength would continue in the afterlife and that the family's honor would not be tainted by an improperly conducted death. While the Viking death rituals seemed gruesome and terrifying, they were also a way of celebrating life. The Vikings saw death as an extension of their warrior culture, a continuation of the fight. They honored the dead in the only way they knew how, with respect, power, and strength. For them, death wasn't something to fear, it was something to conquer. And the rituals they performed ensured that they would continue to be a force to be reckoned with, even in death.